Please don't leave us. Save us. 5 broken voices were mixed with the howling wind. In the white snowstorm of Wyoming in 1868, 5 Apache girls knelt beside the wrecked wagon, their bodies shaking, their lips blue with cold. Ethan Ward stood frozen in the snow, his hand gripping the stock of his gun, as if it were the only thing solid in the world. He could have turned away. He could have just kicked his heels, let the storm do the rest. No one would know. No one would blame him. But the plea clung to his ears, like a thorny rope wrapped around his heart. Please don't leave us here. Whatever you want, will do. Ethan felt a sting in his throat, not because of the promise, but because of the desperation in each word. He scanned the ravine. Stained hoof prints led down the slope to the overturned wagon. A horse was dead in a torn saddle, its reins cut hastily. The smell of broken wood, rusted iron, fresh snow. In the distance, the pines were like black ramparts, the wind howling like a funeral trumpet. Ethan took a deep breath, the smell of ice stinging his lungs. It's none of my business, he told himself, and his fist shook again. 5 girls. The eldest hard forehead. Deep eyes tried to stand but collapsed immediately. Another, broad-shouldered, panting as if she had just pulled a tree trunk. The third was still very young, her teeth clenched, still forcing a smile to keep from being afraid. The fourth, quiet as stone, hugged her chest to keep the person next to her warm. And the last one was small, eyes half open, her breath thin as mist. Ethan knelt down, placing the back of his hand on each of their necks. There was a pulse, very weak. Listen to me, he said shortly, his voice hoarse with snow. I'll take each of you home. Don't close your eyes. The eldest nodded slightly, her lips moving soundlessly. Ethan took off his coat and wrapped it around the small girl. The cold went straight into his back, hissing like a knife. He took the tarpaulin off the wagon, yanked a good board, and tied it with a broken rein to make a draft. That'll do, he muttered. The first trip. He lifted the little girl onto the board and dragged her across the snow, strewn with pine roots. Ethan's horse panted in the wind, its mane matted with ice, but it backed away. It was a mile to the cabin, horribly far in the storm. With each step, the wind whipped snowflakes into his face like sand. He lowered his head, straining his shoulders, the ropes tightening in his hot palms. The cabin appeared like a black dot in a sea of white. Ethan kicked the door open with his knee, dragged the board in, laid the girl on the wooden floor, and covered her chest with furs, pulling them up to her chin. Breathe. He turned before he could light the fire. There were still 4 of them out there. He grabbed the lantern, checked the oil another round, and rushed out, the door slamming behind him like a sigh of wood. Second and third trips. Left shoulder aching, thigh straining to the point of tearing. Ethan switched hands, pulling diagonally to avoid the direct wind. The heaviest of the bulky girls was nearly unconscious. Her pulse was slow as a distant tap, but her calloused hand still unconsciously clung to the edge of the board. The youngest girl was more alert, her eyes wet, trying to smile as the cabin roof loomed. Breathing is life, Ethan said curtly, both an order and a promise. Fourth trip, deeper snow, shifting wind. Ethan slipped, his knee hitting the ice, sparks of pain shooting up to his hip. He gritted his teeth, untangled the rope from the ledge, pulled again. At the edge of the woods, something moved a dark line, then gone. He paused for half a beat, his heart pounding. Bear? Wolf? Human? He pulled his hood deeper, ignoring the questions scratching at the back of his neck. Save the people first. As he set the 4th girl down on the cabin floor, Ethan leaned against the post, panting. His throat was burning, his breath turned to thick smoke. He glanced at the 5 figures lying close together like fallen birds. Their lips were less purple, their skin was still cold, but not as icy as outside. One more trip, he said to himself, and grabbed the lantern again, rushing out. The last trip. The leader, deep eyes, hard forehead. When Ethan bent down, she clutched his arm, her voice just a breath of wind. Don't leave anyone behind. He nodded slightly. No one. He pulled the board away, and then he saw, on the edge of the path, fresh hoof prints in the newly fallen snow. Not the same ones. Someone had come, stopped, and then gone very quietly. Ethan's back was cold in a different way. The cabin opened again, swallowing them into the warmth. Ethan put the last girl down, covered her with fur, and locked the wooden latch. The wind beat against the walls like a rushing forest. He knelt down, checking each wrist, each breath. Here, he muttered. Here they are. He stood up, reached for the flint. In the brief moment before the sparks flew, Ethan looked through the small window. Beyond the sea of snow, a dark streak had just crossed the edge of the forest and disappeared. The wind carried no human voices, but it carried a very clear premonition. They had caught the scent. Ethan stoked the stick, tapped the flint. The first spark sprang up, trembling like an oath. "Keep your eyes open," he said, his voice low and firm. "The fire is coming. From now on, no one will be left behind." The fire flared up, crackling, casting a warm yellow glow across the old log cabin. The wind outside was still howling, threatening to tear the roof off, but inside, the fire was the thin line that kept the 5 Apache girls from the white death that awaited them. Ethan knelt beside the stove, his calloused hands piling more dry wood. His back was soaked, his shoulders numb from dragging each body through the storm, but he did not allow himself to rest. "As long as there is life, there is hope," he muttered, his eyes sweeping over the 5 pale faces huddled on the floor, covered with fur blankets. The youngest, Nael, moaned softly, her eyelids twitching. Ethan poured some warm water, lifting her head. Her purple lips parted, and the water spilled out the corners of her mouth, but some of it went down her throat. "Good. Drink," he said, his voice rougher than his eyes. Nael trembled, clinging to his hand like the last rope she had left. In the other corner, Mika, a muscular figure, coughed repeatedly, her chest tight. Ethan quickly massaged her to get the blood circulating, then pulled another blanket over her. She was as heavy as a rock, but her half-closed eyes revealed a will that would not easily give up. Sayan, the youngest, with a face covered in mud and snow, suddenly opened her eyes. She gasped, but her lips curved into a thin smile. "We aren't dead yet?" Ethan frowned. "No, and I won't let you die." Sayan chuckled, then fainted, but that smile left a strange echo in the storm. Ahyoka, the eldest, seemed to understand more. Despite her limp body, she tried to lift her eyes to look at Ethan. "Why? Don't you leave?" Her voice was weak, but her gaze was like a knife piercing straight into the heart of the person opposite. Ethan was silent. For a moment, he only heard the sound of wood cracking in the fire, heard his heartbeat echoing dead memories. He didn't answer. He simply pulled the blanket higher over her shoulders as a brief reply. Tyanita, calmer than most, had not yet opened her eyes, but her lips were moving in Apache invocations. Ethan did not understand them all, but he heard the rhythm of a lullaby. He sat still, the wood-carving knife in his hand still, letting the melody flow into his ears, blending with the wind outside into a long, mournful song. Time passed as slowly as ice. Ethan kept moving, adding more firewood, rubbing each person's limbs, giving them sips of water, drops of corn wine. He did it all in his exhaustion, as if it were God's command. The damp, cold, and small cabin had now become a battlefield where he fought alone against the death that lurked 5 frail souls. Near midnight, the sound of horse hooves echoed outside, faintly, then died away. Ethan started, his eyes fixed on the foggy window. Darkness filled the room, and he could see nothing. He grabbed the rifle propped up by the door, his finger resting lightly on the trigger. But a few seconds later, there was only the howling of the wind. Maybe it was his imagination, maybe it was wolves, maybe it was people. Ethan swallowed, turning back to the fire. "If they are people, they will be back soon," he whispered. As the rooster crowed lonesomely from the valley, the first light filtered through the cracks in the cabin's planks. The fire had died down, leaving only red coals. But on the floor, the 5 girls' breathing was clearer, their skin a little pinker. Ethan sat down, his back against the wooden pillar, his eyes heavy. In the moment between waking and dreaming, he caught a glimpse of his wife and children sitting around the fire, smiling. He woke with a start, cold sweat on his forehead. No, it wasn't his family who had died. It was the 5 lives he was keeping alive. Ethan pulled the blanket over his shoulders, his eyes never leaving them. "If you live," he muttered, "I must live to guard them." And that night, for the first time in years, he did not feel completely alone. The sun rose weakly behind the mountains, tinting the pines in pale streaks of light. After the long night, the damp cabin smelled of wood, smoke, wet skin, and the still labored breathing of the 5 Apache girls. Ethan Ward added a piece of coal to the stove and stepped out onto the porch, looking up at the morning air. There was no more snow, but the sky was ominously dark. Behind him, a weak but clear voice said, "You saved us, but you need to know the truth." Ethan turned. Ahyoka, the eldest, had sat up against the wooden post. Her deep black eyes stared at him, no longer lost as they had been the night before. Ethan was silent. He was used to such openings. No secrets brought peace. "You weren't just lost in the storm, were you?" he asked hoarsely. Ahyoka nodded slowly. "We weren't lost. We were abandoned." The other girls woke up one by one. Tyanita sat with her arms crossed, her eyes anticipating his reaction. Mika winced as she tried to stretch her legs. Sayan smiled wryly, and Nael pulled the blanket to her chin, shivering. Ahyoka continued. "3 nights ago, we were tied up and stuffed into wagons. They drove us to the Ash Creek camp. When the wagons broke down, they didn't try to fix them. They just left us in the snow." Ethan frowned. The "they" in the Apache's mouth could mean many people. He gritted his teeth. "Who did it?" Tyanita spoke, her voice calm but cold. "The army. Your government." Ethan fell silent, his jaw clenched. It wasn't the first time he'd heard this, but hearing it from a survivor made his blood run cold. Cyan interrupted, her voice shaking but still teasing. "They called us a burden," and laughed. "The snow will take care of the rest," one of them said. Nael burst into tears, sobs choking her throat. Mika put a strong arm around her shoulders, looking defiantly at Ethan. Ahyoka took a deep breath, her shoulders thin but her eyes hard. "The reason they want us gone is because we saw." Ethan stepped closer, squatting down to eye level with her. "Saw what?" The room was silent. The wind outside the door crept in softly. Then Ahyoka spoke, each word cutting into wood. "We saw with our own eyes the soldiers kill an entire family of innocent Indians, then blame it on bandits. They didn't want witnesses." Ethan listened, his chest tightening. He looked over the 5 pale faces, seeing not only fear but also a frank, painful look. He knew the truth was a death sentence for anyone who dared to keep it. He stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, the snow was shining, hiding all traces. But he knew full well, if the 5 girls were right, the soldiers would surely come. And if they caught him protecting them, there would be no turning back. Mika said hoarsely, "If you hand us over, they will spare you." Ethan turned around, his silver eyes flashing with anger. "Spare? Who have they spared?" The cabin fell silent. The wind whistled through the cracks in the wood, pushing a spark of fire to the surface. Ethan walked back to the center of the room, placing his rifle on the table, his hand heavy as stone. "Listen carefully. You girls can bring disaster here, but I pulled you out of the snow, and I will not throw any of you back." The 5 girls looked at each other. A sudden light flashed in their eyes, a mixture of hope and fear. Ethan sat down, his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on the fire. He did not know what the price of this decision would be, but he knew one thing. From this moment on, the blood of the 5 Apache girls was mixed with his own fate. The afternoon was gloomy. The snow had stopped falling, but the sky was as gray as a heavy blanket. Ethan Ward was chopping wood on the porch when he heard the sound of horses' hooves in the distance. The sound was unmistakable, regular, disciplined, not hunters or strangers. He dropped his axe, his hand immediately reaching for the butt of his rifle by the door. Less than a minute later, 4 horses appeared at the edge of the woods. On the horses were men in worn blue cloaks, with military insignia on their shoulders. Leading the way was a man in a wide-brimmed hat, with a neat figure, but his eyes were as cold as iron. Ethan recognized him immediately, Lieutenant Franklin, who had fought alongside him in the war. The horse stopped right in front of the yard. Franklin lifted his hat, smiling faintly. Long time no see. Hart. Are you still hiding in this mountain? Ethan stood up straight, his voice calm. The mountains are quiet. The people are quiet. What are you doing up here? Franklin glanced at the cabin, nodded slightly to the soldiers. We're after a group of Indian girls. 5 of them, 18 to 20. Rumor has it they've wandered into the area. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. He kept his face impassive, only replying curtly, I haven't seen anyone. Franklin curled his lips. You know, Hart, you're not in the army anymore. No one will protect you if you get involved with them. Behind the cabin door, the 5 girls were pressed to the floor, breathing hard. Ahioka held Naomi's hand, her eyes fixed on the thin slit of light under the door. Franklin dismounted and headed straight for the porch. The tips of his boots clattered against the wooden steps. Let us in and search. If they weren't here, you'd have nothing to fear. Ethan blocked the door, his hand resting lightly on the butt of his rifle. This is my land, my cabin. No one comes in without my permission. The air was as tense as a bowstring. The 3 soldiers behind them quietly unloaded their guns from their saddles, their eyes fixed on him. Franklin looked straight at Ethan, his eyes testing fire. Do you know the consequences? Hide the Indian trash, you will burn with them. Ethan did not move. His face hardened, his voice low as thunder. Then go find them in the woods. Here, there is only me. The moment seemed like a lifetime. Then Franklin snorted coldly, signaling the soldiers to lower their guns. Okay, but mark my words, Hart, we will return. And if we find the truth, this pile of rotten wood will be nothing but ash. He turned, mounted his horse, and the soldiers followed him into the pine trees. The sound of hooves gradually faded away, but the smell of danger still hung in the wind. Ethan slowly exhaled, his shoulders still tense. He opened the door and entered. The 5 girls were still sitting in the dark, their eyes wide with panic. Niall burst into small tears. Cyan tried to comfort her with a clumsy hug. Ethan put the gun down on the table, his voice resolute. They know. Next time it won't be 4 people, but a whole group. Ahioka raised his head, his voice hoarse. So, you still want to keep us? Ethan looked around the cabin. The firelight cast shadows on 5 young faces, weak but bright with will. He clenched his fists, his words coming out like a knife slashing down. I pulled you out of the snow. No one was left behind. Outside, the wind howled like a trumpet, signaling the approaching battle. Night fell, the wind whistled through the ravines, carrying the cold scent of pine resin. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered, casting shadows on the rough wooden walls. Ethan Ward sat silently before the fire, turning a small knife in his hand. He was used to quiet nights, with only the crackling of wood and the howling of the wind. But now the small space was filled with the trembling breaths of the 5 Apache girls. Ahioka sat against the wall, her eyes still alert. Tyanita, calm, sewed the torn flap of her shirt. Cyan glanced at him occasionally, a mischievous smile hidden in her fatigue. Mika arranged the firewood, her movements heavy but sure. Niall curled herself in her blanket, breathing softly. Each of them had a different posture, but all seemed to hang on to the question, was this really a place to stay? Ethan stood up and walked toward the wooden beam in the middle of the cabin. On that old wood, he had carved 2 names years ago, Clara and James, his wife and son. The memory pricked, but he did not allow himself to falter. The knife in his hand sank into the wood, making a dry sound. Crack, crack, crack. The sound silenced the cabin. 5 pairs of eyes turned to him. Ethan said nothing, carving each letter, each name unfamiliar to this house. Ahioka. In the firelight, each line appeared clearly. Then, Tyanita. Then, Cyan. Next, Mika. Finally, Niall. A bead of sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold wind whistling outside. He wiped the blade, took a step back. 6 names lined up, mixed between the dead and the living. The cabin suddenly felt heavier, but also less cold. Niall slowly sat up, her eyes brimming with tears. No one has ever written our names on a house. Her voice broke, and Cyan glanced at Ethan, her lips curling into a choked smile. Mika sniffed, hiding her emotion by tossing more logs onto the fire. Tyanita merely nodded, her eyes shining brighter in the darkness. Ahioka, after a long moment of silence, let out a short sentence. You've just put yourself on a dead end. Ethan turned, his gaze as hard as stone but with a rare hint of tenderness. I know, but since I pulled you out of the snow, we've been on the same path. No one answered, but no words were needed. In the small room, the 5 girls' breathing suddenly mingled with the crackling of the fire, creating a new rhythm, the rhythm of a home that had just been lit. Ethan sat down, his back against the pillar, his tired eyes looking up at the 6 names carved into the wood. He didn't know if the future would bring blood or ash, but at least tonight this cabin had another reason to keep the fire burning. Outside, the wind howled more fiercely, as if trying to erase all traces. But inside, the names on the wooden beams became an irrevocable oath. The next morning, the silver-gray sky covered the pine forest in a thick mist. Ethan Ward led his horse out to check his traps, his eyes scanning the soft snow. He was used to the silence of the mountains, but today his heart was heavy. After the night of carving names into the wooden beams, something warm and dangerous stirred inside him. He had tied himself to the fate of the 5 Apache girls. As he rounded the slope, he stopped. In the snow, a row of dry branches had been neatly broken, arranged in the shape of an arrow pointing east. Beside them, a few pine branches were bent unnaturally. Ethan bent down, his fingers touching them. This was no random trail of wind or wild animals. This was a signal the kind left by hunters or tribesmen to each other. He straightened, his silver eyes flashing with suspicion. There can't be a mistake, he thought. Someone in the cabin had left this message. And if the tribe or strangers read it, any attempt to hide it would be in vain. Ethan turned back faster, his heart filled with anger. When he pushed open the cabin door, the fire was still burning in the hearth. The 5 girls were dividing the work. Mika was chopping wood, Tyanita was sewing blankets. Niall was quietly stirring the pot of soup. Sayan, with her usual mischievous smile, was startled when his eyes swept over her. Ethan threw the dry branch to the floor. The sound made the room fall silent. Who left this mark in the forest? His voice was like broken steel. The girls looked at each other. No one spoke. Only Sayan swallowed, then pursed her lips. Ethan walked straight forward, his boots clicking on the wooden planks. I asked again, who did it? Sayan took a breath, then raised his head. The cabin was silent. Ahioka frowned, and Niall trembled as she pulled the blanket higher. Ethan gripped the handle of his knife, his voice deep. What are you going to do? Call the whole tribe here? Or signal the person who is hunting you? Sayan trembled, but a stubborn smile still flickered at the corners of her lips. I just tried to find my way back. I couldn't be sure you would keep your word. White people often say one thing and do another. Ethan was stunned. Her words were like a sharp knife stabbing into an old scar. Years ago, it was empty promises that had taken his family away. He clenched his fists, then let them go. I saved you from the snow. I risked my life to fight the soldiers. And you still dare to doubt? Ahioka interrupted, her voice hoarse. Sayan is just a child. She doesn't understand everything. But you have to understand us. All our lives, we've learned to trust no one but ourselves. Ethan turned sharply, his eyes like knives, but then softened when he saw Nael was crying silently. He took a deep breath, his voice lowered. Okay, but listen carefully. Once again you've revealed your traces. I can't keep anyone. Sayan lowered her head, not daring to answer. Mika put her hand on her shoulder, as if to reassure her but also as a reminder. The atmosphere in the cabin was as tense as a string about to snap. Ethan sat down on the chair, his eyes still heavy. His hand unconsciously touched the rifle. In his heart, the faith that had just been kindled was now wavering. But deep in the eyes of Ahioka, Tyanita, Mika, Niall, he also saw something else. They were not just afraid. They were learning to trust painfully, but truly. Out in the forest, the wind howled long. Somewhere, the sound of horse hooves echoed, far but clear. Ethan was silent. The mark that Sayan had left, perhaps someone else had seen it. He looked around the cabin, his voice as hard as an order. From now on, no one will step out of the door alone. If the enemy has read the mark, They will not leave us alone. The fire in the furnace cracked, casting the shadows of 6 people on the wooden beams. 6 names were carved into the column like cuts, and also like a newly signed sentence. Late afternoon, the sunlight faded on the mountainside. The pine forest shimmered with darkness. Ethan Ward rode along the trail to check the traps, but he was uneasy. Ever since he had discovered the signal in the forest, he had always felt like someone was watching. The atmosphere was heavy, like before a new storm. As he rounded a cliff, thin smoke rose from the valley below. Ethan pulled on the reins, squinting. In the dim light, he saw tents, horses tied in rows, guards walking with guns. A makeshift camp, not a military one. The way the tents were set up, the wild firelight, these were mercenaries. Ethan's heart suddenly tightened when he recognized a figure sitting in the middle of the camp on a shabby wooden chair. A face he would never forget. Tanner Pike. Years ago, they had been comrades in arms and war. Pike had laughed mockingly as he divided the spoils, had sworn to live and die together. But then he betrayed him, leaving Ethan in an ambush in exchange for gold and freedom. The scar along Ethan's shoulder still ached every time he remembered it. And now, he appeared again, like a ghost from hell. Ethan backed up his horse, intending to retreat silently. But from the camp, a shout rang out. Someone up there. The gun was raised. Sparks flashed. The bullet hit the tree trunk right next to Ethan. He spurred his horse, galloping through the pine forest, ducking to avoid the barrage of bullets. The wind whistled in his ears. Shouts followed. It took him nearly half an hour to escape the ring of the forest, his heart pounding like a drum. Back at the cabin, Ethan was panting, his face pale. Ahioka immediately realized something was wrong. Who's out there? Ethan put the gun on the table, wiping his sweat. Mercenaries. They've set up camp in the valley, and their leader is someone I used to know. Who is it? Tayanita asked, her eyes as sharp as knives. Ethan was silent for a moment, then let go. Tanner Pike. The air froze. That name didn't need much explanation. Mika clenched her fists. Sayan looked anxiously at the door. Niall hugged the blanket tightly. Ethan sat down, his voice hoarse. Pike is a traitor. He knows me, knows my weaknesses. If he's here, it means that not only are you 5 hunted, but I am also in his sights. Ahioka frowned. What does he want from us? Ethan answered briefly. To silence you, and use you as bait. The whole cabin was silent. Only the crackling of wood in the stove could be heard. Finally, Sayan spoke in a trembling voice. So, what do we do? Run away? Ethan looked straight at her, his eyes silver as steel. Run? Do you think he will let you be? Pike will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He pulled out his dagger and stabbed it into the table. There is only one way. Stand firm. Mika nodded, as if finding the familiar determination. Tayanita remained silent, but her eyes were shining with determination. Niall cried softly, but her small shoulders were no longer trembling with fear. Ahioka looked at Ethan for a long time, then said in a low voice, If you choose to fight, we will not leave you behind. Ethan was stunned for a moment, then nodded. In that moment, there was no longer a rancher and 5 lost girls. They had become a common front. That night, Ethan did not sleep. He sat by the fire, sharpening his knife, listening to every sound in the forest. In his mind, the image of Tanner Pike appeared clearly, the mocking smile, the sharp eyes, and the betrayal of years ago. This time, he knew. He could not let the past repeat itself. Outside, the wind howled long. In the darkness, there seemed to be the slow sound of hooves circling around. Pike was approaching, like a patient wolf hunting its prey, and the duel was not far away. The night was heavy as lead. The wind howled, accompanied by the crackling of pine branches. Ethan Ward sat by the door, rifle in hand, eyes unblinking. In the cabin, 5 Apache girls dozed around the fire, but their breathing was restless. Everyone knew danger was at the door. A creak sounded in the yard. The horses neighed. The reins shook violently. Ethan jumped up, signaling for silence. Ahioka gripped Niall's hand. Sayan held back his breath. Mika grabbed a large log as a weapon. Tayanita pulled out a small knife hidden in her shirt. The cabin was plunged into total darkness. Then the door burst open. 3 black figures rushed in like a whirlwind. Gunshots exploded. Bullets tore through the wooden walls. Ethan fired back. One fell to the steps. Blood spattered the snow. But the force was too great. Shadows surrounded the cabin. The torchlight reflected on their hateful faces. "Burn the house." Tanner Pike's hoarse voice rang out, hissing like a knife-cutting stone. The torch was thrown in, and the fire quickly caught on the dry wooden wall. Black smoke rose, stinging the eyes. The 5 girls coughed, their eyes filled with panic. Ethan fired 2 more shots, then shouted, "Go out the back door." He pushed them through the narrow passageway leading to the floor where the firewood had been hidden. But just as he stepped forward, a blow from the butt of the gun landed on his shoulder. His whole body collapsed. The gun flew out of his hand. "Old man, you won't escape this time." A mercenary laughed loudly. Ethan jumped up, grabbed the man by the collar, and punched him straight in the face. Blood splattered, but immediately, 2 others rushed in, kicking him down onto the wooden floor. His head was dizzy, his eyes blurred with smoke and fire. Ahioka tried to rush forward to pull him up, but the 2 men grabbed his hair and dragged him out into the yard. Sayan struggled, bit hard on the arm of the one holding him, but received a punch that made blood flow from his lips. Mika knocked one of them down with brute force, but was hit in the back with a stick and fell. Tyanita and Niall were also tied up with rough ropes. The 5 girls were dragged out like prey, their hands tied, their bodies thrown onto the backs of horses. Ethan, struggling to get up in the smoke, screamed hoarsely, "Let them go." A figure stepped out of the ring of fire. Tanner Pike. He still had the same arrogant posture as before, his lips biting a red-hot cigar. The firelight reflected on his scarred face, his smile twisted like a devil. "Hart, I told you, sooner or later you would have to come out of the lair. And now, you came straight into my arms." Ethan propped himself up on his hands, struggling to stand. Blood ran from his temple, clouding one eye. "Pike, you bastard." Pike laughed dryly, raising his hand to signal. One of the soldiers kicked Ethan hard in the back, knocking him to his knees in the snow. The crowd laughed, their laughter mixing with the wind like mocking demons. The cabin behind them burned fiercely, the flames licking the roof, crackling like gunshots. Ethan watched as the roof where his wife and children's names, and the names of the 5 girls had been carved the night before, was slowly reduced to ash. His heart ached, pain mingling with choking anger. Pike leaned down and whispered in his ear, "I don't need to kill you now. Look, Hart, these 5 little birds will lead you to a slow death." Then he laughed, signaling for the group to retreat. The 5 girls were tied up, their horses galloping into the darkness. Smoke and fire still glowed red behind them, but the mercenaries had disappeared into the deep woods. Ethan struggled to get up, his body aching, his left shoulder cracking. He grabbed the rifle he had left in the snow, his eyes flashing with hatred. The cabin was ashes, but there was only one fire in him, to reclaim the people he had just robbed. He bound the wound with a ragged strip of cloth and mounted his horse. The firelight behind him reflected in his silver eyes, cold and fierce. Ethan spurred his horse, charging into the darkness, following the fresh hoofprints in the snow. The real battle had begun. Dawn was breaking, dyeing the Wyoming sky a grayish purple. The cold mist was thick, the dim light stretching the ghostly shadows of the trees. Ethan Ward rode, the wound in his shoulder, stinging with every gallop, but he did not slow down. He had only one goal in mind: hoofprints in the snow, leading straight toward a town that had been abandoned for years. When he reached it, he reined in, his heart pounding. The town was a ghost: collapsed roofs, gaping windows, thick dust. But in the middle of the main street, a campfire burned brightly, silhouettes of people scattered. Mercenaries gathered around a pile of liquor and guns. On a wooden post in the middle of the square, 5 Apache girls lay tied up, their hair disheveled, their faces bruised. Ahioka looked up, her eyes hard, though her lips were bloody. Tyanita remained silent, her gaze as sharp as a knife. Sayan bit her lip until it bled to keep from crying. Mika tightened the rope until it broke, and Niall trembled but still looked up, as if believing Ethan would come. And he did. Tanner Pike sat on the old chair, a red-hot cigar in his mouth. He saw Ethan from afar and laughed loudly. I told you, Hart. The old wolf never abandons the pack. Ethan urged his horse forward, stopping at the head of the street. He dismounted, his rifle slung across his shoulder, his figure thin but his eyes cold as steel. Let them go, Pike. This is between you and me. Pike stood up, waved his hand. The mercenaries stopped laughing, spreading out on both sides as if to form a bloody arena. Yes, between you and me. All those years ago, you escaped by luck. Today, I will finish you off. He pulled out a pistol, twirled it in his hand, and pointed to the open space in the middle of the main street. Western law, Hart. One-on-one. Whoever is faster lives, whoever is slow dies. Ethan looked at the 5 girls. They nodded slightly, their eyes filled with determination and fear. He took a deep breath and stepped out into the dusty street. Pike stepped forward, his boots clicking loudly on the rotten wood. The whole band of soldiers circled around, dead silent. No more wind, no more birds. Just the pounding of hearts and the void of death. Franklin, an old soldier among them, shouted, "Count to 3." Then he drew his gun. Ethan relaxed his shoulders, his hand resting lightly on the pistol grip at his side. Pike smirked, his eyes flashing with hatred. 1, 2, 3. The sound of wind. 2 guns leaving their holsters. The explosion rang out, smoke billowed. Ethan felt the bullet tear through his shoulder, the hot spurt of blood. But at that moment, he pulled the trigger. The bullet flew out, straight into Pike's chest. He stopped, eyes wide. The cigar fell to the wooden floor. Blood stained his cloak. He staggered, then collapsed in the M. The early morning wind was cold.